Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ted Gardner, and I am an interviewer for the Library of Congress Oral History Program, which is so ably conducted here by our Public Library of Cincinnati. And Dennis Daly is our historian and our videographer. And today we have the great honor and privilege and joy, and for me particularly of a friend, to interview Dan Fulton from Oxford, Ohio, who served in the Army in the ETO, European Theater of Operation. And Dan, where were you born?
I was born in Grand Rapids, in Michigan, in 1924.
1920.
I tell people that was a very good year.
Very good year, an excellent year. And I think it was improved by your birth.
I hope so.
Did you go to elementary school there?
No, my father was a Baptist minister, and at about the age of 2 or 3, he took a church in Buffalo, New York, and
that's interesting.
I entered the school system, public school system in Buffalo.
In Buffalo. Tell me about your family. You have brothers and sisters?
I have an older sister, Martha, and a younger brother, John, who recently passed away, and then a younger sister named Eunice. And both Martha, Martha and Eunice are, one lives in Chicago and the other lives in Detroit.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting about your father being a Baptist minister. And that in itself has got to be a big story. Did you find growing up as a minister's son anything different or particular?
Preacher's kids were all labeled as a unique group.
Yeah, right, right.
They weren't expected to misbehave in any way.
And
because it was
went to church every day.
On their dad, right. And,
sure.
Things like that.
Of course. Well,
I was a typical boy.
That was wonderful. That's just great. So how long did you live in Buffalo?
Well, we lived there long enough for me to reach the 3rd grade level, I think it was. And then my father took a church in Chicago, and we moved there and entered the public school system.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that was just before the World's Fair held in Chicago, which was the years 1933 and 1934. So
that was a outstanding world event, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And I can remember things of it. Took the sky ride, which went from a tower that was constructed on the lakefront over to an island that was made specifically for the World's Fair, and they had a lot of exhibits over there. And, that was a big thrill for me to take that sky ride, because I was only 9 or 10 years old.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was, and that was a great world event, you know. It was interesting, right in the depths of the Depression.
Yes.
And it was kind of letting the world know about the United States, the heartland and so forth.
Yes. We did not feel the Depression per se. I know that after meeting my wife, who I didn't meet for quite a few years, the girl that would be my wife, we didn't meet for many years later, but her father was a school teacher, and she told me that during the Depression, the school teachers in Chicago were not paid with real money. They were paid with what's called scrip. And there would just be certain merchants and certain businesses in the city that would honor that scrip.
That's right.
But they're very thankful that that was available to them, because they could buy groceries and, and clothing and whatever other needs they might have had.
Well, I should say. In Buffalo, of course, now Buffalo in those days was a really booming industrial city, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Steel and,
Steel mills were there, chemical plants. Niagara Falls wasn't far away. And
Right.
of course, that was always a place of attraction for
great tourist. Yeah,
travelers to come and visit.
right. How did you like the winters in Buffalo?
I don't remember a lot about that. We lived on a Bidwell Parkway, which was had a great big tree-lined area.
Mhm.
Not just a narrow parkway, it was quite wide. It was almost like a half a block wide.
Mhm.
And it was a good playground for kids, and
Great,
that I remember well.
sure. Did you have any particular interest? Well, then, when you came to Chicago, was that when you went into high school?
No, I was just in third grade.
Oh, okay.
So
Where did you go to high school?
went to high school in Chicago
Hmm.
and graduated in 1941. Somewhere along the line, I skipped a grade in class.
Hmm.
And I was also the smallest kid in all the school photos, whether it was graduation from 8th grade, grammar school to go to high school, or even in, I guess I was putting on a little bit of height in high school, but I really didn't reach full height until I think I reached 18 or 19 years old.
I see, I see. So after high school, what transpired?
Well, I enrolled in Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and took mechanical engineering as my elected course material. And quite frankly, I didn't do too well that first year. I was under the misapprehension that first year college was just going to be fifth year high school. But I found out
No way.
very soon that that was not the case.
Welcome to the
So I entered the sophomore year in college on probation.
Uh-huh.
And I had just turned 18 that summer, entered school that fall for my second semester, or my second year. And about that time, of course, this was in 1942, there was quite a recruiting drive put on by the military.
Right.
And I saw a film that documented the movie star, I'm getting a forgetful moment. Jimmy Stewart, that's
Oh,
right.
yes.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
And
Mr.
he
Smith
was
also-
pictured taxiing up in a single-engine airplane and climbing out on the wing and having his parachute thrown over his shoulder and stepping down off the wing and saying, "I want you to consider joining the
How
Army Air
about that?
Corps."
Oh, my gosh,
And,
yes. I
So
remember those.
that was, didn't take much more persuasion than that to say, I ought to go and enlist. And so I was 18 and enlisted. It was under the understanding that they would be calling me, but not in the very near future.
Mhm.
But it turned out that I enlisted like in October or November of 42, and I got my papers to come down and get sworn in on either January or February of 1943. So
Boy, that
I was ready for
That was fast.
Army duty.
Right, I should say. Where did you, now this was the Army Air Corps?
Yes.
Before it became the Air Force?
Yes.
Right. And so where did they send you?
My first place of duty was at Wichita Falls, Texas, Shepherd Field. And I spent probably 8 or 9 weeks there. Now, Shepherd Field was a training base for engine mechanics and things like
I
that.
see.
But we were there strictly as recruits for indoctrination and training. So we spent our time
Like a boot camp.
marching and saluting
Sure.
and learning all that.
All that good stuff. Yeah, right. Well, now here you were, 18 years old and far from home. I'm assuming you went down there by train
Yes, I did.
in those days, the old Pullman cars and all that sort of thing. And how did you feel about this? Were you excited? Were you thrilled?
Very much so. I can relate to young men and women today who volunteer for
Right.
service in the armed forces. That you're gung-ho, you want to accomplish something, and of course, we were always subjected, as were the citizens back then, to think of the war effort, the programs to buy war bonds, the programs to conserve on key ingredients, key commodities and things like that, and that was back when, remember, we had Lucky Strike cigarettes in green packages, and suddenly they came out in white packages because Lucky Strike Green had gone to war.
One of the biggest advertising scams in the world, but
Right.
it was brilliant.
Right. But that was to tell people that the green was now going to be used in the camouflage paint that was being put on the tanks and the trucks and the carriers and what have you.
Well, remember the introduction of margarine? Do you
Yes,
remember
I do.
that?
With the little squeeze bag.
A little squeeze bag with the coloring in it?
Yes.
Because it was white.
Yes.
Isn't that funny? Remember those things. Well, Shepherd Field, of course, was a very, very prominent Air Corps station.
Yes, it was. That's right.
And so I'm assuming there were several thousand people there. And
Right, and all of us in our grouping were committed to go into flight training eventually.
okay.
And so, first of all, you had to be classified and put under all kinds of tests for your ability to observe spatially things, to observe mechanically things, they had a whole list of things, including psychological interviews and what have you.
Sure.
But that was not in store for us yet because there was still a very large group of people going through the training programs for either pilot or bombardier or navigator, and there just weren't openings. But they had brought all these new recruits in, and they had to find a place for them. So about that time is when the government contracted with some of the universities and colleges in the country and set up what they called college training detachments. And these detachments were used to keep the minds sharp by putting you through college training of some sort. And also they had contracted with civilian pilots in the areas where the colleges were located to give some flying time to those people in the course. And so each of us were, I think, permitted to get maybe 5 or 6 hours of flying time in. And I was fortunate enough to have as my instructor a man who, back in those days, had done a comic strip called Flying Jenny. I don't know if you ever recall that or not.
I don't think I'm familiar with that one.
And so one of the things that I recall and have it in my collection at home was a little cartoon that he made of the character in Flying Jenny, and she was a very attractive young girl.
I'll be darned.
And I don't recall seeing many of the comic strips myself, but he made that as a special effort for those students that he had instructed.
Right.
We didn't get to solo the plane at all, but we got rides for 6 hours.
Sure. Was that in a, for example, a Stearman?
No, it was in
biplane or
a
Waco?
Cessna or a Piper Cub
Oh, I
or
see.
a plane of that sort.
Okay. Oh, boy.
And I happened to be at Union University in Jackson, Tennessee for that
I
portion.
see.
And I think I stayed there for something like 5 or 6 months.
Wow, that's great.
And then is when they called you in for classification. So we got on the train again and went from Jackson, Tennessee to San Antonio, Texas to go through the big selection process of, as I mentioned before, the testing and the physicals and all the other things.
Were
that
you the
involved.
right guy for the
Right,
training?
right. And
Yeah.
so most of us wanted pilot training, and I was fortunate enough to get selected for that. And immediately moved right across the road from where the classification center was to what they called the pre-flight center.
Pre-flight.
And that was all ground activities, no flying, but lots of physical education, lots of instruction, military history, things of that nature. And all done in a climate that was very conducive to being outside all the time.
Oh, that's great.
So,
Did you find that the little bit of time in college that you had was an advantage for you?
to some extent, but I found that most of the other guys with me were also
Also in the same.
college people.
Gotcha.
And mostly either freshmen or sophomores. And so we were all pretty much in the same age group.
Now, when you moved out of primary to basic, what happened?
Pre-flight first, then
I mean,
primary.
pre-flight, then
Right.
primary, yeah.
We were sent to Sykeston, Missouri, and that's south of St. Louis, inland a little bit from, I shouldn't say inland, but a little bit west of the Mississippi River.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever heard of Cape Girardeau.
Oh, sure.
And the Sykeston, Missouri was a Parks Air College, which was a St. Louis firm that had
That's a famous.
flying training locations in several states, I believe.
Oh,
And,
yes.
so these were all civilian instructors, and we flew the PT-19, which was the Ryan,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the Stearman, which I think was the PT-17, and I'm not quite sure of that. But it was fun, and we got to do acrobatics, and of course we got to solo and what have you, but it was a fixed pitch propeller and no flaps, strictly a basic training.
Yeah.
Right.
But what fun that was, huh?
It was, very much so.
Gosh, I'll say.
The only thing I can recall vividly from that was that every Thursday night was steak night in the chow hall. And of course, this being civilian as opposed to military, we had choice steaks. I don't know where they came from, but it was a most enjoyable
You guys
time.
were pampered,
I
let's
think
face
so, right. Well, each segment now, beginning with pre-flight, and then primary, basic, and advanced, were 9-week segments. And so my next move then was to Sykeston, Missouri, to Strother Field, which is just south of Wichita. And there we flew the BT-13, and it was called the Balti Vibrator. And that was equipped with flaps and two-pitch propeller, I believe. Maybe it was more variable than that, but we did night flying, we did a lot of aerobatics, we did cross-country flying and things of that nature. So it's stepping up a little bit.
Sure.
And that was a 9-week period. And then following that, we moved to Lubbock, Texas, and flew a twin engine, can't remember the manufacturer of it now, but we had our own name for it. We called it the double-breasted Piper Cub. It was a canvas covered structure, and I believe the wings could have been metal, but we went into deeper activities in navigation and night flying, and also being able to handle two engines instead of one, and don't believe we got into formation flying or anything like that, but that was great fun as well.
Yeah, now, you were on your way to get your shaved tail bars, weren't you?
Right. I graduated and got my wings and my second lieutenant bars in late June of 1944. Mine was called, excuse me, the class of 44F. And of course, there were just countless numbers of advanced training bases throughout the country. We happened to be in the Central Training Command, but there was also the Southeast Training Command and the Western Training Command. But I'm going to guess that there were probably 20 advanced classes coming out every 9 weeks, and our class was probably close to 100.
Sure.
The only claim to fame I have is that Tom Landry was one of my classmates.
Really?
Yeah, right.
The coach.
Right, quite a man. I never had seen him since, except on television.
Yeah, right.
Coaching from the sidelines.
Right.
But,
Did you get to know him at all?
no,
No. Okay.
I have him in my yearbook that we got when we graduated.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Came from Mission, Texas, is
Oh,
his
right.
hometown.
Well, you were getting to know Texas pretty well, weren't
Oh,
you?
yes, very much so. It's still
Back-
very close to my heart.
Back and forth. You like Texas.
Right.
That's great. Everybody does. Yeah. Well, so Dan, now you got your wings, got your gold bars, and where was your first assignment from that?
First assignment, well, first they gave me a 30-day leave so I could
that's
get home.
nice.
All right, that was the first leave I'd had since January of 1942, so this is June of 1944. Of course, in the meantime, my folks had visited me when I was in Jackson, Tennessee, and then my mom and my fiancée, well, she was just my girlfriend then, came down when I was in near Wichita, and in fact, that's Winfield, Kansas, is where Strother Field was, which is
Winfield.
south of Wichita.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
And then my dad came down and visited when I was in Lubbock. So I did see family, but it was nice to get 30 days at
Oh
home.
my gosh.
At which time, when I got back to Lubbock, the train was about ready to leave for Shreveport, Louisiana. And at that point is where the crews were made up. I was going to join a crew of B-26 medium bomber. And of course my pilot, I was going to be the co-pilot because I had no training in the plane, and my pilot had just gone through 9 weeks of training in the B-26 in Del Rio, Texas. So he came from there. I joined him. There was a gentleman from New York State, Bill Maxson, who was a navigator bombardier. And back in those days, the bomber crews always had a pilot, a co-pilot, and
Right.
a navigator,
Navigator.
bombardier. And if you were in a medium bomber, like we were, you had 3 enlisted men, the flight engineer, the radio man, and the tail gunner. So I've got a picture here of
Great. Pull that out.
of
Well, now,
our crew as we were made up made into a crew at Barksdale, but then we went to Lake Charles, Louisiana, which is 100 miles or more south of Shreveport, and that's where we did our training.
oh, yeah. Oh, what a
And
handsome
so
crew.
Julian
Boy, look at
Brooks is the pilot, and Bill Maxon is the
that. Gotta find Fulton here.
bombardier, navigator, and Bob Beal is the flight engineer.
Sure.
Bob Broussard is the radio man, and Joe Burns is the tail gunner. And we flew all of our missions together.
Now,
as a
the
crew.
26th was called the Marauder, wasn't it?
Yes.
And we've heard over the years, I think, conflicting stories about the plane itself. Whether it was a temperamental plane, it was shorter wing than the B-25, as I
Yes,
understand.
it was. But it was, I think it could carry a heavier bomb load,
Yeah.
for one thing. It flew a little bit faster. It required a little bit more attention flying.
That's a great picture.
But there were some problems with it that had to be corrected. But it did have its reputation of being called the Martin, instead of the Martin Marauder, it was called the Martin Murderer.
Murder,
It
yeah.
was called Widowmaker. There were a number of planes
Oh.
that were
Oh.
training down in Tampa at MacDill Air Force Base, and it got to be known as a plane a day in Tampa Bay.
Oh, my gosh. Very encouraging.
But that was due to a flaw in the electrical system.
Oh,
And
okay.
so by tweaking the electrical system, I think they jumped it up from 12 volts to 24 volts, or 8 volts to 16, or something like that. But
I
it all
see.
had to do with controlling the pitch of the propeller. And the failures that caused some of these planes to go into Tampa Bay was that they would experience what's known as a runaway prop. And you do not want
No
the
way.
prop to run away when you're
No.
on full
Yeah.
throttle, trying to get off the ground,
Yeah.
and trying to
Oh,
get some
boy.
altitude. And
Well, now, you started out as a co-pilot?
yes,
Mm-hmm.
and we spent 9 weeks at Lake Charles, which took us probably, well, let's see, all of July I was on leave, made up our crew in early August. So it was probably in October that we completed our training at Lake Charles. And there it was to get the crew acclimated to each other and to get into training in formation flying, and we did some bomb dropping and practice bombing and things of that nature, low-level flying out over the Gulf of Mexico and things of that nature. So along in October is when we were assigned to go to Savannah, Georgia, to pick up a brand new B-26 and
Boy.
fly it overseas.
Aha,
And that was fun,
across the Atlantic.
right. And since it was late in the year, normally during summer months, they would fly the northern route, which was to leave from someplace in Maine and fly out to Gander, Newfoundland, and then to Greenland, and then Iceland, and then across to the British Isles. But winter weather in the North Atlantic is not conducive to flying. And so there were too
Terrible.
many planes crash landing in Greenland. You all remember the story of the Glacier Girl, the
Oh, yeah.
P-38 that
Yeah,
crashed
right, on
and
Greenland.
ended up 30 or 50 feet below
Yeah.
the surface of
And
the
a lot-
ice, and they fished it out and
lot of-
rehabilitated it and made it flyable
Sure.
again.
Did a lot of them go into the water, into the deep?
I'm not sure. I'm sure there were some because it was really a weather problem and a navigation
Yes,
problem.
yeah.
And,
Yeah,
so the southern route was a much
more conducive to,
conducive to travel. So that took us about, I'm going to say, almost 3 weeks to complete.
really?
Not counting the fact that there was a hurricane coming up the East Coast.
Oh, boy.
Out of the Caribbean. And so we took our plane back to Shreveport and spent 3 or 4 days there,
Uh-huh.
and then went back to Savannah and finally got started south. Our first jump took us to West Palm Beach, Florida. Stayed overnight. Then we flew to Berinquin Field, Puerto Rico, and spent overnight there. The next hop was to British Guiana, Georgetown, British Guiana, in South America, and overnighted there. Flew on to Natal, Brazil, which is, back up. Belém, Brazil, which is right at the mouth of the Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
But to get to the best takeoff point to go across the South Atlantic, we flew to Natal, which is out the most furthest out point of the South American continent, because the next flight was going to be the most critical one, and that was to take us halfway across the Atlantic to what's known as Ascension Island, which is just a little dot on the map.
It was just a rock, wasn't it?
Just about a rock. It was probably 5 miles long and 1.5 miles wide, something like that. But it was a key point for transferring equipment, flying equipment, and provided a stop for refueling.
Mm-hmm.
And from there we went to Roberts Field, Liberia, which was in the
And this,
again,
yeah, the
this
southern
little point of the
yeah,
westernmost point of Africa. And the only thing I remember about that was that Firestone had a big rubber plantation nearby. We didn't get to visit it or anything like that. And then our next hop took us to Dakar, French West Africa. And then one more stop in Africa, which took us across the Atlas mountain chain to Marrakesh, Morocco.
boy, you had some great,
And
great
a couple of
stuff.
these stops, we spent more than just an overnight. Either there was some problem with navigation equipment or engines or mechanicals or something like that. But we finally made the landfall at what's known as Land's End, England, when we left Marrakesh. We flew out over the Atlantic because Spain and Portugal were not our true friends at that time.
That's true.
And so we landed in England, but we were to deliver the plane eventually to a big depot in Liverpool. So I think I counted 11 stops, and that was really a thrill to be able to
Really
do
seeing
that.
the world.
In the meantime, we all started putting together what's known as a short snorter collection, where you get
Sure.
a bill from each place where you stopped, and whoever you could get to sign it, which is usually in a bar or something.
Oh, sure.
The officers club bar or something.
Not usually in church.
Right. So I ended up, when I came back from Europe, as having quite an extensive.
Oh, you had a real
Right.
collection. That's,
I would have it today, but I recently gave it to my grandson.
oh, that's wonderful.
He's going to treasure that.
Absolutely.
So that got us from October probably into mid-November of 1944. And of course, we went to a replacement depot, which was in Stone, England, which was in the Midlands. And there we sat, waiting to be called to duty.
Orders.
In the meantime, of course, after D-Day had been in June of that year.
Right.
And so the heavy bombardment, the heavy bombers of the 8th Air Force remained in England, but the 9th Air Force, which was the medium bombers and the fighters, most of those bases left their English bases and moved to France.
Oh, yeah.
And so we were waiting to get called to
Go across the
base in
channel.
France. Right.
Yeah.
And finally, we got the call sometime between Christmas and New Year's of 1944. Of course, that was just about the time the Battle of the Bulge was in
Right.
full swing. And so we got our call, and I can't for the life of me remember how we got over there. Whether we flew or whether we took the train down to the nearest port and took a boat across the channel or just what. But we ended up at an airfield and joined the 391st Bomb Group,
Oh, okay.
575th Bomb Squadron, in a little town of what's known as Roy-Amy, which means friend of the king or the king's friend in French. And that town is located north and east of Paris, probably halfway between Paris and Brussels, Belgium. And so we flew all of our missions there. And the first mission was probably the one that made the biggest impression on me, because it started out very wrong. You remember, or history will tell you, that the weather was all in favor of the Germans.
The
not-
enemy,
not-
absolutely.
not
Terrible
the
winter.
Allies.
Terrible winter.
So it was very bad weather, and we were grounded then as soon as we joined the group. And
Frustrating.
right, so one day the weather broke enough that we could get up and do some practice formation flying. One of the things you practiced quite often was how to join up in formation. You know? And so we took off with a full bomb load, and made,
What size bombs were you carrying?
I think in that day we had two 2,000-pound bombs.
Wow.
And these were used primarily to drop on bridges. We were going for either railroad bridges or highway bridges.
Right.
And the thing that differentiated the 8th Air Force from the 9th Air Force, and vice versa, was that the 9th Air Force were called the tactical group. And their targets were things like bridges, railroad yards, fuel dumps, ammunition dumps, one time a troop concentration, things of that nature, where the 8th Air Force was called strategic, and their targets were all large areas like oil refineries, ball bearing plants, steel mills.
Marshalling yards. all that.
Marshalling, well, no, that was ours.
That was yours.
All right.
Okay.
But they went for what I'd call pattern bombing, where we went for pinpoint bombing.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and many times we would drop bombs, and from a group of 18 planes, and they'd go back the next day with a photo recon plane and take pictures of it, and you'd see bomb holes all around it, and never did a single bomb hit the bridge.
Isn't that amazing? I know. I've read about
But
that.
those 2,000-pound bombs were what could bring a bridge down.
Oh, boy, I'll say.
Yeah.
Well, now, by this time, you've become a pretty experienced co-pilot.
Well, I didn't get to take off or land the plane, but I flew it a lot in formation. And particularly, you see, a six-ship formation has a lead ship and two wingmen.
Yeah.
And then under the lead ship and slightly below is the slot man, and he has two wingmen. And so if we're flying left wing on the lead plane or left wing on the slot plane, the co-pilot is much better at flying than the pilot is, because he's got to look across the cockpit and sometimes through the co-pilot's
Of course.
silhouette to see what he's doing. Plus the fact that the tighter you can fly a formation, the less target you show to
Yeah.
whatever is on the ground shooting
Yep.
you,
That's
shooting
right.
at you. And the
Right.
German 88 aircraft gun has got to be still historically the best gun that was ever made
Yeah.
for that purpose.
Yeah. They threw up a lot of flack, didn't they?
did.
Terrible.
They did not see a German fighter plane at any time, because by that time the German Air Force was really
Decimated.
was being decimated, or
Yeah.
had been decimated. That's true.
How about that? Well, my goodness, you have just, you've witnessed history, you've made history.
Oh,
yeah.
I was telling you about the first bombing flight.
Okay, good, great,
mission,
that's what
I
we
should
want to
say.
hear.
We took off to practice, as I said, and suddenly our field closed in. We could not get back in. So we diverted to a nearby field, probably, and I can't even remember which bomb group it was, but they had B-26s there too. And so we landed. Where are we going to sleep? It was cold.
Gee.
I'm going to guess it was in the teens or low 20s. And they found a building available in town. It was just a small town that had a big meeting room in it. And somebody was able to scrape up some cots, but they couldn't find any blankets.
Oh my gosh.
And here we are with, of course, we knew it was just a practice mission, so we didn't dress like we were going to dress for a true mission.
Right.
But I did have coveralls, and I had my flying boots on, which are sheep-lined boots, you know, so that would keep my feet warm. But I didn't have my shoes on. And it kept bothering me that if we went up that morning and had to fly a mission from there, which we eventually did, and suddenly my plane got hit by flak or something, and I had to bail out, the first thing that was going to happen when the chute popped was my boots were going to fly off, and I'm going to be walking around in the snow down there in bare feet. So.
Terrible.
So ingenuity raised its beautiful head. And, someone said, well, why don't you just take your flying suit, which was nothing more than coveralls, and kind of make a strip out of it and put a slot in the top of your flying boot and then tie that, you see, through the slot, and do it on both sides.
Hey,
And thought, that's a pretty good idea.
darn right.
I felt a lot better going up. And sure enough, they called a mission for the next day. We weren't going to go back to our base because we already had the bombs loaded. And we were briefed on where the target was and what we were going to do and what we expected to find and so forth. So there we were. And it was an interesting thing. And I'm not sure whether it was on that mission or one or two missions after that we did lose a plane. It got a direct hit, and it just disappeared into a big cloud of shrapnel and
Gee.
pieces and parts and what have you. And, but since we got into combat so late, you know, not till January '44, we were only flying, I believe, until April when the war ended.
Mhm.
And so we didn't get our full tour in, and as a result, I think our crew logged 23 missions. And you had to have 50 missions if the war had continued before
Sure.
you got a pass to go home.
So you got about as far east as, you were still a couple hundred miles away from Berlin, weren't you?
Well, that's true, but our targets were more to support the frontline action,
I see. Yeah.
where the 8th Air Force heavy bombers were going much further in.
Right.
Their missions would run 8 hours.
Yes.
Our missions would run mostly 2.5, 3
Mhm.
hours
Mhm.
at the most.
My goodness sakes.
We could do 2 missions in a day, and a couple times we did that too.
Now, in the wintertime aboard the plane, Dan, were you affected by the weather? I mean, did you feel it on your body? I know that you had some heat in the plane, but
Very little, but we dressed very warmly.
Okay.
And, there were no drafts. Nobody
Right,
flew
I
with the
got you.
windows open. Or
Sure.
anything like that.
well, that it's just fascinating, and as a matter of fact, there's a man here in town who lives in Hyde Park. His name is Earl Slanker, and I'd love to get you together with him sometime because he was a B-26 pilot,
I'd like to meet him.
and he was stationed in southern Belgium, up in that part of the area where you were. And now, any more funny experiences or?
Well, not really, although I've not kept in close contact with anyone from the crew with the exception of my pilot, who's still living, and he lives in Macon, Georgia.
That's
He,
great.
he stayed on, let's see,
J.N. Brooks.
right. He stayed on while the rest of the crew went home. I actually got back to the States in late December, early January of 1945.
45.
And
See, the war was over in Europe in May of 45. May of 45.
oh, I'm sorry,
VE Day.
early 46 then, yeah.
Oh, 46.
Late 45, early 46.
Okay. Well, you got
But,
some extra time over there.
right. You got to come home on the basis of point accumulations.
right.
And so someone who had only been over as short a period of time as I was and
And you weren't married either.
was not married, that's
So
right.
if you'd been married, they would have brought you home soon.
And I went home in a much less glorious way on a...
You didn't get to march up Fifth Avenue, New York?
No. Got on a Liberty ship out of Le Havre, France, and ended
boy.
up back in Boston Harbor about a week and a half later, going through a very serious North Atlantic storm in
Oh.
December.
Murder. Oh, boy.
And
Terrible stuff. Well, you have, goodness sakes, your overall impression of your air, by then it was the Air Force.
no, not then.
Hadn't been changed to the Air Force yet,
No.
still Air Corps.
Right.
Okay, well, your overall feeling about that experience and your,
That was the greatest thing that could
wasn't it
ever
something
happen
though?
to me.
It was
Right.
special, wasn't it, to
Well, again, I think that's what's important about the youth today, is that they need
be? Yeah,
some military experience for the
absolutely.
purpose of being able to have respect for authority, to be able to obey commands, to have a purpose, and and meaning to life. When I came back, I went back to Northwestern and breezed through my sophomore, junior, and senior year on an accelerated basis. I
On the
got
GI
married
Bill.
to my bride of 57 years, who
Oh, wow.
she went to heaven in 2003,
Oh,
but
I'm sorry.
that's all right.
Yeah.
She's in a much better place.
Okay.
And she wrote me every day that I was in the service. And of course, when you're in a state of being transferred from one base to another, she's writing, but in the meantime,
You're not getting it. and
you're
you-
not getting any mail for a while, and then suddenly it starts piling up on you, you know. And, great letters to read.
Oh,
Wish
what-
I'd saved some of them.
I know. That was just it was a great, great, great experience. And, you know, so many people say, well, it must have been a terrible, tough time and so forth. Well, a lot of people did have that, but most of us appreciate
Well,
it.
everybody has a different story to tell.
Sure.
And certainly, we didn't slog ourselves in the mud, except when we were walking to or
Yeah.
from the chow hall.
Yeah,
you know.
right. I know what
But
you mean.
an interesting point I might make there, toward the end of the war, I would say probably in March, they somehow, the commands within the ETO, someone had a bright idea of letting some of the Air Force personnel, Air Corps personnel, spend some time in the front lines and bring some of the frontline people back to fly some missions.
Oh,
So we had an infantryman fly on one of our missions,
wow.
and it was one where we encountered a lot of flak.
How about that?
So when we got back and landed and asked him how he enjoyed it, he said, that was pretty good. He says, but there's no place up there to dig a foxhole.
I should say very, very different. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, that the Army did that with the Air Corps. You said you embarked from Le Havre,
Yes.
France, on a Liberty ship, and that must have taken you a couple of weeks to get back.
Yes, it was.
And that was in the wintertime?
In the winter. And
Oh,
I'll tell you,
North Atlantic?
Terrible. I think most of us lost weight because
Yeah.
it wasn't conducive to eating, you know.
No, you couldn't hold it very
No,
long.
couldn't hold it.
Oh, my goodness. Well, that was really something. And then you hit Boston, and by that time, the war was over.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you didn't.
Well, and the war in Japan was over too.
Yes,
you know.
yes, yes.
We happened to have been moved from Roy-Amy to a base up in Venlo, Holland at the time, and I recall the joy and jubilation that everyone experienced, because when we found out that there had been a peace treaty signed in the harbor in Japan, I believe this was at night for us, everyone proceeded to go out and hop in a plane and turn the gun turrets up into the air, shoot off tracer bullets, you know.
Oh, my gosh.
So, I'm sorry that I didn't get pictures of that, but I can remember that.
Oh, for heaven's
quite well.
sake. Oh,
Right.
that's very interesting. Yeah, exuberation and joy and, well, now you got back and you went right home, did you, as you hit the
Yes.
States? Were you
I
then?
can't remember the base in Illinois, because my family, of course, lived in Chicago.
Uh-huh.
But I believe it was near Rockford, Illinois, whatever the base was. It was
Mhm.
And I got discharged, and so first opportunity I had was to ask this charming young lady that had written me so often,
And so loyally?
yeah, if I could have her hand in marriage. Of course, we asked her dad that too, and of course So we rushed down to find a diamond ring we could put on her finger.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
we were married in June of 1946.
How about that?
So, but by that time I had already re-entered Northwestern. And, she got a nice job, and the GI Bill was very much of use to not just me, but so many of the returning veterans.
That was one of the greatest things that ever happened.
Was.
It was a
It really
rebuilding
was.
of our nation, really.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true.
And the opportunity for fellas and girls who might not have gone to college normally
Yeah.
had the opportunity to do that. And it expanded our country so importantly. And well, that's I know, and I had the same experience. Do you have reunions, your group? Is there still a bond?
Yes, we have a publication, but the group keeps shrinking, of course, because so
sure.
many of us are disappearing from the scene.
Yeah.
So now I believe they have one group that's called the 9th Air Force Bomber
Association.
Group. Yeah, association. I attended one of the 391st reunions with my wife, and that was probably back in the late 80s or early 90s. And it was a nice thing, but since I had been with the group for such a short period of time, I didn't know a lot of the
Right.
people there, and most of those were old timers, had been in the permanent party, not the crews that
Yeah,
came in and moved
right.
through and went home,
Right.
But it was,
Hmm.
and the publication always came out every quarter, I think, so
Well,
we
as you
stay in touch
say,
that way.
yeah, as you say, our ranks are dwindling. Somebody said the other day it's 1,200 a day now of veterans that are dying. And when you realize that our entire nation went to war, even people who stayed home to
That's
work
true.
and support and work in the factories and farms and so forth. But 16.5 million Americans served in World War II. Now we're down to about 2 million or something like that. So we, like yourself and I, we want to hang on as long as we can, of course, and that's why our Hornet Breakfast Group is so important.
Yes,
and
it
it's
is.
one of the few groups that's growing as more and more people learn about it.
Right. Well, it's been opened up to include more than just the Hornet.
Well, that's
veterans,
true,
too.
and
Yes.
that's very important. Well, listen, we're just about at the end of our tape here, and I want to thank you again for appearing and making your story available. It's so interesting, and it's so important, and your family is going to be so happy to have this DVD that you can all look at from time to time, and future generations can refer to it and so forth, and that's very important, that we get these stories and get Dan Fulton in the record. A copy of that DVD will be sent to the Library of Congress in Washington, and a copy kept here in the archives of the Public Library of Cincinnati. So you'll have that as well as the one for your family and yourself. And we thank you for bringing this picture. What a great looking bunch of guys. And I know that Dennis will be happy to talk with you afterwards, and you'll want to scan that picture. That's a wonderful. So the best of luck to you.
Thank you, Ted.
My pleasure,
Appreciate
Dan.
it.
I'm glad we're friends, and look forward to seeing you in the future.
At the next Hornet Breakfast, how's that?
At the next one, yep. First Friday of April, and it'll be out there at the IHOP and on Coleraine.
Very good.